Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. Reacting to the repressive religious policies of England in 1630, over the next 10 years, about 20,000 Puritans emigrated from England to Massachusetts and the neighboring colonies during what came to be known as the Puritan migration to New England. One such migrating Puritan was English minister Roger Williams, who founded the colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Let's travel back with Eric Yanis of the Other States of America podcast to learn more about this remarkable time in North American history.
Roger Williams, known to all students of history famously as the founder of Rhode Island. Sometime in 1633, Roger Williams was forced out of Plymouth, not banished. There isn't a lot of opportunity there. They kind of want him gone. And he ends up in Salem, part of the Massachusetts colony. The same place that he was asked to be the reverend for before, and Boston did not approve. This time, he manages to get a gig there of some sort. So you would think, given these hardships and being in the New World and among these different communities, that he would start to soften. He would start to come around towards some sort of center, become moderate in his views. No! He just goes even further, doubles down on his pre-existing views, and then pushes the line further out. Now he not only questions the validity of a king to claim all these foreign lands, he actually says that it was a sin for the king to claim these lands, because he was essentially committing an act of theft. Now, if you listen to previous episodes, you know back in England, 1634, 33, 35, in that zone of time, the great Sir Ferdinando Gorges and his friends on the Council for New England are trying to find ways to undo the Massachusetts Bay Charter. They want to get rid of Massachusetts and install their own order over the top of it, which would also include the formal introduction of the Anglican Church to the New World. Massachusetts cannot have this guy accusing the king himself of sin, and so he is put in front of the General Court of Massachusetts. And in December of 1633, he gives satisfaction to the court, and he retracts some of his most inflammatory statements, including what he deduced from the king having no right to these native lands, that the Massachusetts Bay Charter, derived from the Council for New England, derived from the power of the king himself, was invalid. Williams backs off on his statements. After all, he has a wife and he has kids. There are people to support, and so he relents for what was probably all about 8 months. Because in August of 1634, Roger Williams becomes the pastor of the Salem Church. And he immediately uses the pulpit to not only rehash all of the things that got him in trouble before, but now he has a whole new list of grievances. He says that Massachusetts needs to seek out a new charter, as the old one was acquired based on rights the king never had. Massachusetts also had state-mandated church attendance, whether or not you were a member of that congregation. He said that was immoral, and that the church and state should be separate entities. He further went after all Christian monarchs, Catholic, Protestant alike, for claiming land anywhere in the world that was not their own. Roger Williams argued that the land could not be claimed by a king in the name of Christendom because Christendom itself was a lie. Nations were civil bodies, perhaps containing Christians, but were not themselves the body of Christ with agency, and were often found fighting with each other. There is no Christendom, a broad condemnation of the entire imperial age and Western Europe. To get more specific, he said that these Puritan colonies, where by this point the local reverends are all calling them a new Israel, a new chosen people, a new chosen nation, a city on a hill. Roger Williams says, no, Massachusetts, Plymouth, they're not the new Israel. Israel is dead. Israel died as a real political entity, and an idea died long ago. This was a startling, materialistic view of the present and history for Roger Williams to spew from inside of a church. Williams even advocated for the non-church members in the colony to not have to make an oath of allegiance to Massachusetts, as the court would require from time to time, because that oath would require swearing to God. And what if that person doesn't believe in God? Yes, you heard me right. We're in the 1630s in Puritan New England, And here we have an individual advocating for the political rights of atheists. It is very difficult to find another individual during this time anywhere in the world who has the set of views that I just laid out over the last 5 minutes or so, which at least I view as shockingly modern. And what's interesting to note is, as I read different books on English history by the greatest historians of the last 100 years, the American colonies are footnotes in those books, barely mentioned to the history of England proper, especially of the 17th century. Believe it or not, you probably won't hear of John Winthrop. You probably won't see in that book the name William Bradford. You won't see Miles Standish. Maybe a slight reference to Reverend John Cotton, but almost begrudgingly an English history book on this time period. If it's covering general social history and developments, it will begrudgingly mention Roger Williams. Because again, his views seem so far ahead of his time that you have to mention it. His views on church and state clearly belong 100 years ahead of his time in the 18th century. And his views on Native Americans belongs all the way in the 20th century. In July of 1635, for these views, Williams is officially warned by the General Court, letting him know, we don't approve, we're watching you, and the next step is that we're going to take some action here. And behind the scene, different Massachusetts officials are trying to push Roger Williams out of the Salem church, to the point of excluding and otherwise intimidating certain members of that congregation. Williams fires off 2 separate letters, sending a copy of each to every church in the Massachusetts colony. The first letter outlines all the various abuses that his church has suffered at the hands of authorities in Massachusetts. The second letter proposed that the Salem church break off communion with all of the other Massachusetts churches, thus becoming its own separatist congregation. Just to remind you, in 1635, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is frantic over a rumor that Sir Ferdinando Gorges has a professional army of 1,500 soldiers coming to the colony to formally submit it to his rule. They're drilling their militias more than ever. They're building up their fortifications. They're expecting to be invaded. Now more than ever, internal threats or dissension has to be squashed. In October, Williams is formally called to the General Court to answer to these letters he's been circulating. The nature of the letters speak for themselves, and Roger Williams offers no retraction. As such, the court finds him guilty of sedition and heresy. The punishment would be banishment. However, at the moment, Williams was quite ill, and he was given 6 weeks of time in the colony in order to recover, as long as he stopped spreading his ideas. Back in Salem, with a sentence over his head and extremely ill, his own congregation begins to fall away from him. Only a minority of the small village now supports him, and despite all this, he won't stop sharing his views. He keeps talking, and he doesn't go anywhere. The 6 weeks pass, he's still in Salem. Come the end of 1636, colonial authorities realize they're going to have to force him out of the colony one way or another, and they hatch a plan to arrest Williams and pay someone to take him by boat back to England. And now the dates get fuzzy, because everything that's going to happen is a bit clandestine. But either in late December 1635 or very early January 1636, Roger Williams gets word of this plan, perhaps from John Winthrop himself. And Williams flees into the wilderness, sick, and as the earliest sources claim, completely alone. By the time the sheriff arrives at Williams's house, he was gone. The great heretic would not be deported back to England. They didn't know where he would resurface, but were sure that he would be causing them further headaches. Or maybe he would just die. He was sick. It's the dead of winter. As far as they know, he has nowhere to go. Well, he did have a couple places to go. It's known that Roger Williams was in the care of the Wampanoag in the spring, so it's likely that he stayed at the great Wampanoag sachem Osamequin's winter camp. This undoubtedly saved Roger Williams' life, and he remained eternally grateful to Osamequin. He came to the opinion, living among the natives, that they were spiritually or morally just as good as any Christian, and that their societies were far more peaceful, at least internally. He says of them, "A man shall never hear of such crimes amongst them, of robberies, murders, adulterers, etc., as amongst the English."
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.